Hey friends, in today's video I wanted to briefly talk about why I'm taking the path that I'm taking in my 20s, and specifically what I mean by this is why I'm going broad in my 20s instead of focusing in on one career path early on, settling down early on, and getting locked away in security. First, I have to start this off because this book had a profound influence on why I'm taking the path that I'm taking, but it's this book, The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And one of the reasons why this book was so impactful for me is at the time I was just getting into finance, and so in finance you learn a lot about the compound effect within certain accounts, right? You leave the money in for a certain amount of time, it's getting steady growth, but then after a certain amount of time that it has enough volume in it or enough money in it, you're going to have an exponential return, a compound effect within your money. Except the part where, for me, this intrigued me was, well, what if I did this except with education, right? Instead of viewing the compound effect only in terms of money, what if I did it in terms of education and experience? So what if in my 20s I went broad instead of focusing on one thing in particular? And this for me has been very interesting, to say the least, because I'm at the point now where I've graduated college, and you can already see the different paths that people are taking. Some people are still just really searching for like what their purpose is in life, and that's totally normal. Other people are already married and have their 9-to-5 and probably will have a kid relatively soon. And you got the whole kind of spectrum in between, right? So you got the people who are way searching, kind of like a wandering thing, which is a very normal thing. And then you have the people who seemingly already have it basically figured out, and that's basically what life is going to look like for the next 20 or so years, relatively speaking. And so for me, I've always known that, if at any time that I wanted, I most likely, Lord willing, but I most likely could go and secure a normal 9-to-5, doing whatever they're asking me to do, right? But one of the things that I have really started to believe is I don't know, especially in the future, how common the 9-to-5 will be. I think there will be a lot more people who are doing their own gigs. They are talented at whatever they're talented at. Maybe even the job that they're currently doing, they'll do that thing, except for themselves and on their own time. And so I think we're going to have like a lot more people who are, I guess you could say self-sustained, but the jobs that they do, they're doing it in terms of a one-person business. And so for me, it's been really interesting just trying to understand the different ways of life, I guess you could say, or the different modes of education. And this is one of the reasons why, for me, I spent a lot of my time and money on different types of education instead of, let's say, one career path or one investment or anything like that. I've spent mine on education, going broad with experiences, trying to travel. And one of the other books that I read, I think it was like last year, was called The Defining Decade. And this is by Meg J, Dr. Meg J. This is what it looks like. And this is really interesting too, because she did a lot of research on 20-somethings, and basically she just asks a lot of questions in this book. She doesn't necessarily tell you one direction to go, but she's done a lot of research on problems that a lot of 20-somethings are having across all areas of life, like work, relationships, the myriad of different things that 20-somethings are trying to figure out. And so that book was really interesting for me to read as well, because it's like, okay, well, this is a reflection of all the questions that we're asking, right? And, I just think this is so important, because one of the things that I've realized, especially for myself, is people can tell you how fast things will come, but even if they tell you that, you really don't realize how fast things will come, right? So, you graduate high school, you then go into college, and you're like, oh wow, okay, some people chose not to go to college. Oh, I wonder what they're going to do. And then you see them doing whatever career path they're doing. You're like, oh, okay, well, they went military. So-and-so is getting some certificate to go do this type of work. Okay, so not everyone's going to college, right? And then within college, Some people meet someone early on, some people meet people later, and then they're married either in college or after college. And then you have the people who don't meet anyone, and then they're still kind of doing their thing. And so you really begin to realize, oh, okay, all this stuff actually goes really, really, really fast. Like all this stuff that I experience as like a normal part of my existence, well, and then you're like, oh wow, okay, it's all going away. And so then everyone's left feeling alone and feeling like they're missing out on stuff as well. And the people who tend not to as much is the people who are married and have the job, but then sometimes they have the regret. I'm not saying it should be a regret, but I'm saying sometimes what I've noticed is they have the regret of settling down really early, right? Because then they're like, oh, well, it's a great thing, but then they didn't get to go experience as many other things. And so every single thing has their pros and cons. And one's not better than the other. There is no relation to anything like that. But I just wanted to briefly come on here and say why I'm taking the path that I'm taking, which is going broad in my 20s, to experience different cultures, to learn different things. Like, you know, I've gotten a certificate in holistic coaching. I've gotten I'm getting currently a certificate in film school. I graduated obviously with my degree at UF, and there are a couple other things that I'm working on right now that just is kind of going broad with the interests. And this to me is one of the things too that I've thought about, even in terms of like higher education, is you could get a PhD in your 20s, and that's great. But one of the things that I've seen, at least a trapping within that, is you may be really skilled at a certain thing, and you may know a lot about that one thing, but then you can kind of be delusional with yourself, thinking that like you're really smart and you know a lot, but you're actually ignorant to the majority of the way that the world works. So you may know a lot in your specialized field, and that's great, but what about the rest of the world? And so for me, I've kind of purposely postponed on the trying to reach success anywhere early, and instead just trying to take in more of the way that the world works and more of the way that people think. Again, that's not even a right way to think, it's just a way to think. But I wanted to briefly come on here and describe, that's why I'm taking the path in my 20s that I'm taking, because of what I, one, had intuition with before, thanks to this book that I read. You know, after I read it, I kind of saw a lot of what it was talking about, but I translated it to, like I said, education. But then two, just kind of what I've been noticing as I watch people commit to like one path. And like, obviously everyone has to commit to some extent to some path. But I just think that we'll see more people going broad. We'll see people who are multi-talented. We'll see people in roles. Life thus far, you know, for a lot of people is very linear, right? You try to get the good grades in high school, to go to the good college, to get the good job, then married, kids, etc. It's just boom, 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 boom. You work at a job, you then retire, okay, everything's great. Well, that's a reality, but I think that reality is slowly disappearing, right? It's like how companies, for a while, they had pensions. Well, then pensions went away. You know, 10% of companies still have them, probably less than that. Now people have 401ks, but it's like, okay, well, for the groups that grew up with pensions, well then with their kids, when their kids weren't getting pensions, and the idea of not staying at a company for 20 or 30 years, and maybe they moved every 5 or 10, well, that was foreign to the previous generation, right? Well, now we're in the generation of, you know, parents will maybe move every 5 or 10 years, they have their 401k, but they're still in that thought process of getting jobs, you know, the good school, et cetera, and more people are realizing, hey, maybe that's not quite how it's going to be working out for our generation in the future. For some people, of course it will, because you're always going to have overlaps within these things. Like my sister, she even works at a company that has a pension, so she's in the way back generation in terms of working at a company with a pension. But we're just going to be in that period where more and more people, at least for, I think for our generation, are going to be certificate oriented, maybe not degree oriented. They're going to be going to trade schools. They're going to be maybe multi-talented. They're going to be working for themselves. Not even in a big sense, but just kind of in a, whatever they did for the job, they're going to be doing for their own self, working on their own time, and probably at a higher price point, because the 9 to 5 just won't be working out for a lot of people. And there's a lot of tax advantages with being able to work for yourself, with writing off stuff that you don't get as an employee. So I just foresee a lot of these things happening, And for anyone who is younger or anyone who's also in their 20s, I think these are things to think about and consider. Again, I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think it's good to understand the different paths and understand why you're taking the path that you're taking and take it consciously. Because I think the worst thing that can happen is you to be on a path, but it's an unconscious path. Like you don't know why you're taking the path. You're just like, oh, well, I don't know. I kind of just accepted it. And again, I guess that's okay. But I guess what I'm promoting is just more of the idea of whatever path you decide to take, totally cool. It's all good. But just be conscious about why you're taking it and what your plan is moving forward. Because regardless of what path you take, you always need to have a plan. But also understanding that, okay, 20s are okay to explore, and maybe your plan is to have a lack of a plan to some extent. To have no plan, I don't think is a good idea. But to just kind of be in that more exploratory phase, that's okay too. Again, 20s are it's a weird time of life. And so I wanted to just record this video just to say, yeah, I agree. It is really weird because you really start to see paths. And it gets like really weird really quick because the second you graduate high school, everything just begins to happen really fast. So anyways, just wanted to record a short video on that. And if you guys have any thoughts on what it was like in your 20s, or if you're in your 20s, share your experience, or if you're about to be in your 20s, let me know some of your thoughts on what you're thinking and some of the questions that, you know, maybe you're challenging for what you've been told before. You know, with your plan coming up, and maybe you're thinking something different. So anyways, let me know your guys' thoughts.